Now to our top story. 53 Ukrainian prisoners of war have been killed and 75 wounded in the shelling of a pre-trial detention center in the Donetsk People's Republic. Moscow has accused Kiev's troops of intentionally targeting the site. And just a warning, the following images are graphic. You may find them disturbing. Russia says the Ukrainian military used American-supplied HIMARS rocket launchers to bombard the Donetsk facility. 8 of its employees were also wounded in the attack. And our correspondent Roman Kosarev reports from that very scene.
These are just some of the bodies of Ukrainian soldiers which were killed by their own Ukrainian army overnight. Now, these guys, they've been killed by shrapnel. Meanwhile, these guys right here, their bodies have been burned as a result of a strike beyond recognition. Criminal experts from Russia and from the Donetsk People's Republic are now working on documenting every single body of every Ukrainian soldier.
Ukrainian authorities insisted on using this place of detention. It was discussed previously, so they knew perfectly well where the prisoners were being held, and that's how they took the lives of their own soldiers.
Ukrainian army used high-caliber HIMARS artillery systems when they struck this barrack just after 2 o'clock at night. Now, there were at least 600 prisoners in this barrack alone. Now, according to the Russian Defense Ministry, this was a provocation on the part of the Ukrainian army.
A large number of Ukrainian soldiers are laying down their weapons as they know about the humane treatment of military prisoners by Russia. This outrageous provocation was aimed at intimidating Ukrainian soldiers and preventing them from surrendering.
The Ukrainian prisoners of war began to talk about the crimes they had committed on the orders of the Ukrainian authorities, and after that, they were attacked here. Kiev took these actions to gag those soldiers who began to talk about what was actually happening here in Donbass.
Over the last couple of weeks, members of the nationalist Azov battalion started giving witness accounts about war crimes committed by them and their superiors. Apparently, those war crimes were commissioned by the highest authority in Kiev. As a result, they were punished by HIMARS artillery rocket systems. And these are just some of the fragments of that high-caliber shell.
Moscow has accused Kiev troops of intentionally targeting the site using American-supplied HIMARS rocket launchers, saying Kiev's attack was aimed at intimidating any Ukrainian troops who want to lay down their arms. Kiev, meanwhile, claims Russian forces targeted the prison so Moscow could accuse Ukraine of war crimes and hide, quote, the torture of prisoners of war. Those wounded in the attack were taken to a Donetsk city hospital where some have already undergone surgery. One fighter from Ukraine's notorious Azov battalion, who is undergoing treatment there right now, shared details of the attack with us.
At approximately midnight, a shell hit the place where we were. It all happened very fast. The first strike was literally next to us, and the second was right where we lived. The blast was so strong and powerful, everything caught fire. We started to get out. I started to get out. I felt a severe pain in my stomach and fell to the ground waiting for whatever would happen next. Everyone, if it was possible for them, started to leave, with those who were able to helping others. I was unable to. I was locked in pain. I was just trying to get out.
Earlier, my colleague Donald Corder interviewed Canadian journalist Eva Bartlett, who was also at the scene of Friday's attack.
This is clearly an intentional strike on this facility. And it's notable, by the way, I went to the A hospital that was treating some of the injured after going to this prison. Although we weren't able to go inside to see the prisoners, they were in critical condition. A doctor did come out and give a statement, and he said the prisoners are in critical condition, and they're undergoing surgeries, they're being given the medicine and the care that they need. And now I just want to point out the irony that Russia is giving Ukrainian prisoners of war medical treatment, no matter, in spite of the fact that these are enemy combatants, and it is Ukraine that has inflicted their potentially mortal injuries on them. Here's a perfect example of an out-and-out war crime committed by Ukraine with Western weaponry, and it is Russia that is mopping up the mess.
How do you think this incident is going to affect the morale among Ukrainian troops currently in combat?
Well, I mean, we've seen many videos being shared on social media, on Telegram, etc., of Ukrainian troops saying, like, we don't have support from, our commanders. We're being, or in some cases, we're being fired upon by our own our army. We're being deserted. We're being sent out to front lines when we're not equipped to fight. We're being sent to our death. So I would say their morale was probably already quite low. But I mean, this is just the next blow. I mean, they were, again, ironically, in safe hands in Russian imprisonment, because they were being kept safe, they were being fed, etc. But nonetheless, they were targeted by their own government. I mean, it's I can't imagine they could have any morale at this point. We've seen similar things in Syria. We had in Syria terrorists, whether they were Al-Qaeda, Free Syrian Army, ISIS, etc., intimidating civilians from, it wouldn't be the same as surrendering, but from crossing from terrorist-held areas into Syrian government areas, intimidating them by threats that the government would rape or execute them. So we've seen the same kind of strategies that have played out in Syria being played out in Ukraine.
The Ukrainian president's office has accused Russia of orchestrating the attack and called on the U.S. to designate the country as a state sponsor of terrorism. That's just as the U.S. Senate passes a non-binding resolution on the charge.
Elenovka, an act of terrorism by the Russians. They launched a strike on the facility where Ukrainian prisoners of war, soldiers, Azov fighters, were being held. Now they are trying to lie by blaming Ukraine.
Biden's administration has been eager to label Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, accusing it of such activities in Ukraine, which Moscow has refuted. Nancy Pelosi, one of the biggest supporters of the allegation, has been pressuring Anthony Blinken on the topic, but the official power to designate another country as such belongs to the U.S. State Department. We spoke to international criminal lawyer Christopher Black, who says the accusation is pure, quote, fake news, conjured up to give the U.S. the green light to America's objectives.
The timing of this attack, this murder of their own troops as prisoners of war, the day after or 2 days after the resolution was passed in the U.S. Senate is striking. So, but nobody's going to believe that the Russians attacked their own camp and would kill or injure their own personnel who were guarding and taking care of that camp, or administering that camp. This is insane. Nobody's going to believe that story. So it's quite clear that the Kiev regime is willing to murder its own soldiers to create propaganda. But yeah, I think they probably will put Russia on that list. I don't think it means much practically, in practical terms, to Russia right now, because there's obviously a war going on between the United States and Russia.
But Russia is not the only country dealing with such allegations. Former President Donald Trump put Cuba on the list of sponsors of terrorism, the subsequent economic sanctions aggravating Cuba's already humanitarian crisis. Again, Christopher Black says that the U.S. itself should be labeled a terrorist state, given its history.
Cuba's been under attack now since the revolution took place in 1959. And as you know, there was an invasion attempt in '61. Although Obama withdrew the designation briefly, Trump reimposed it, and I do not see any inclination for them to remove it now. They're trying to squeeze Cuba even worse than they've done in the past, and the situation in Cuba is very dire right now. Actually, it's an act of terrorism against the Cuban people to designate it that way, because it allows, under American law, which is illegal, by the way, to impose all sorts of economic warfare on the people of Cuba and make their lives a complete misery, in the hope that they will rise up and overthrow the socialist government in Cuba and put it back under American control. And this is never going to happen. So the economic warfare is going to continue, and every other type of warfare they can use against Cuba and Russia will continue.
Ты ожидал такого экстракшена, когда обещал украинское командование?
Нет.
Что они вообще обещали вам?
Что мы будем находиться в плену, нас потихоньку будут обменивать.
Ты знаешь, сколько твоих погибло?
Точного количества не было много.
53 человека.
Еще раз.
53 человека.